Hey gang, this video is going to talk you through writing lab reports. So first I want to bring your attention to the lab report page on the website, and if you look through this site, this page, you'll see some important resources. So at the very top you see instructions for writing lab reports as well as the rubric. This video will be on this page, and there's some helpful documents, a sample lab report, some stuff about statistics so you can rewatch videos on performing certain calculations, and some associated readings with that. And for the rest of this video, what I want to do is I want to go through the lab report guidelines and a sample lab report. So the lab report guidelines are here, and at the top of this document you can see I have some overall hints that I think or suggestions that I think will be helpful as you're considering your entire lab report. And then I go through each section, and I give you a brief description of the section as well as some do's. So make sure you pay attention to this. These are things you should have or you should do, and there's some don'ts. And these don'ts are basically from looking at previous lab reports throughout all my years, some typical mistake that students make. So I won't read them here, but you need to read through these and make sure you're not making the same mistakes. All right, so let's start with the title. And you can see that you have your title, then you say your name as well as any group members' names. Make sure it's obvious that it's your lab report, so your name should go first. And the idea of the title is that you're giving a clear idea of what is being tested and what you actually found. And this is a statement, not a question. So let's look at the sample lab report here. And you see this person's lab report, the distance between wheatgrass seeds and artificial light source does not affect the growth of the plant. So here we know the test subjects, we know the variable that was being tested, which was the distance, and we know the responding variable was the growth of the plant. And we know the actual conclusion. So this person, based on their data, concluded that there was no effect. So it's a pretty long-winded title, and that's quite all right. Now let's go to the abstract. So the abstract, the abstract gives a reader almost all of the information that they need to know in a snapshot before they decide whether or not they should read the entire report. So it's just one paragraph long, and you're basically knocking out a few quick things: the idea being tested, an overview of the procedure, an overview of your results, and what you concluded. So it literally could be 4 sentences in that. It could be quite all right. So if you look at this person's abstract, look, it's very short, sweet, and simple to the point. And you can see that each sentence is one of those bullet points that I have from my guidelines. So the first sentence, we tested if the distance a plant is from a light source affects the growth of the plant. So that's the idea being tested. We situated seeds inside petri dishes, blah, 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 blah. Overview of the procedure. We found no significant difference, results, and conclusion. So very to the point, very short and simple. Let's go to the background. The background is basically your research and important background information about your topic. So this is going to be several paragraphs long. It doesn't have to be very long, but you probably want to take a few paragraphs. And typically you do your research before you even do your experiment, but you might decide to write your background after the experiment. So you'll have a better idea of what information is actually important, and you probably won't know that till you get your results. And so you summarize what's already known about your topic. You introduce any vocabulary that people need to know. Why is your topic important? You might decide to have an image that can help you explain information about your topic. And you're gonna, in most cases, you're gonna give a prediction. You're gonna say what you expect it to happen based on whatever research. So make sure you only include the research and don't include other stuff like the stuff you wrote in your abstract. This is not a repeat of your abstract. And you're not actually really talking about your results. This is just background information. We'll get the results later. So we look at this background. This one's actually a bit on the short side, but if you read it, it's very effective. It really explains all the stuff that you really need to know to understand this experiment. It has an image, and this image is actually really relevant and is explained in the previous paragraph. So again, you can knock out a really good background without having that, without spending pages on it. But it has to be, it has to give the important information. So materials and methods. This is basically, your procedure. And you have to give enough detail so that if someone wants to replicate your experiment, they know what to do. They know what materials to get. They know what steps and in what order. This needs to be written in paragraph form. So don't write it as a recipe book. And perhaps in previous grades you were able to do that, and there was reason for that. But as we're starting getting more advanced, should be written in paragraph form. Should be very detailed. You should not have separate materials and methods. This should be all incorporated into your paragraphs, so you can incorporate the materials into your steps. So you see an example here where it says we filled a 70 milliliter beaker with 20 milliliters of room temperature tap water. So you notice the beaker isn't listed as a separate material, it's just incorporated into the sentence. The other thing you have to do is you have to include something that's called an experimental setup. So let's look at the materials and methods and experimental setup here. So again, materials and methods, it doesn't necessarily have to be very long as you summarize the experiment. But you notice there's a lot of detail here. So it tells you about the wattage of the light bulb, the name brand of the light fixture. It tells you how much water, tell you distances and numbers, again, name brand of something. So very, very detailed. And you can figure out what was being tested and what was the dependent variable, independent variable from the setup. Now the experimental setup is this image here. So the experimental setup is basically like a snapshot or a photo of how your experiment was set up. And it should give a good idea of the experiment just by looking at this picture. So if you look here, this really gives a good idea of what the experiment was about. So you see a light source, and you see your plants at different distances. It even tells us how many seeds are in each of these groups. It even shows us a heat sink, which prevented the heat from the light hitting the plants. And it even has the cardboard separator between the setups. So this entire setup was repeated several times, and if I want that information, I should be able to find it. Yep, I should be able to find it here. So it was repeated 3 times. But notice this person did not include all of the setups because this is just good enough. So it gives us a really good idea of the experiment. So that's the experimental setup and materials and methods. Your results section, very important section, along with your discussion. The results and the discussion are your most important parts of the lab report. So you're going to organize all of your data into tables and graphs. They should be created using some kind of software, so it shouldn't be any hand-drawn tables or graphs. Everything should be numerically labeled: figure 1, figure 2, graph 1, graph 2. Everything should have a title. The title should basically summarize the trend, and you should have captions. You should have captions for every single table, graph, telling us the trend that's found, or lack of trend that's found in all these figures. And of course, we have to have metric units. Make sure you're not including just raw data. So you might have created a hand-drawn table just to quickly jot down your results. But this is the perfected, organized tables and graphs. So again, you wouldn't include like your spreadsheet that you just, or your hand-drawn tables that you used. And we look at the sample here. Very well done. So you see, labeled, numerically labeled. The title is very clear, tells us there's no difference. There's a caption here, and you see, metric units, everything is labeled and organized. Again, another table. We have a graph here, a scatter plot here. Again, titles, numeric labels, metric units, each axis is labeled, captions, and again, another graph. So this is really well done. And then the final part is the discussion. And your discussion, you're writing your conclusions, you're interpreting data, you're explaining if these results were expected. You are judging your experimental design and suggesting follow-up. So these are organized into 4 paragraphs, and you see from this document that each paragraph is clearly laid out the stuff that should be included here, and it has some don'ts, some mistakes that are typically made. But in a nutshell, the paragraph 1 is your conclusion. Is what did you conclude and why did you conclude it? So you're really talking about the data. You have to refer to your results. Refer to figure 1, figure 2, graph 1, graph 2, table 1, and what exactly led you to your conclusion. You're referring to statistics. You should be talking about all of your data, and you should be discussing whether the data was significant or not. Be careful here. Do not use the word proof, though. People tend to overreach in a conclusion. You have to remember that this is one experiment, and supposedly a flawed experiment. We always find some imperfections. So don't overreach in your conclusions, because conclusions can be changed when there's new data. Paragraph 2. This is a difficult paragraph to explain, but this is where you explain whether your results were consistent or inconsistent with known facts. So based on the research that you did, based on previous experiments you might be aware of, were your results consistent and expected based on previous information? Or is this something completely new? You just discovered a new fact, for example, or this fact completely undermines what's already known. So this is, and you have to explain why, and that happens in paragraph 2. Paragraph 3, you're judging the experimental design. You're identifying how you minimize errors. So what did you do to get rid of sample size error, selection bias, or confounders? And then what errors still remain? So what errors was still in your experiment? No experiment is going to be perfect. And don't mention human error unless you really have reason to believe that there's human error, and don't just make up stuff that's possibly could have happened in your experiment, some mistake. You're really, this is about reasonable things that you have evidence or some reason to believe that affected your experiment. And paragraph 4 suggests follow-up experiments, revisions you can make to your experimental design, stuff like that. And so if we look at this person's discussion, very well done. And notice it doesn't, again, doesn't have to be pages long, but it, depending on your writing style and how effective you can write, you have to address all of those bullet points. So this person was very effective in how they explained the conclusion, and how the results were expected or not expected, some errors that they've identified, and some things they would like to see. Notice the lab report ends in acknowledgement and a bibliography, and make sure your bibliography is properly formatted, and you can see that here with acknowledgement and bibliography. In your lab report guidelines at the very end is a rubric. This is a similar rubric to what was used in 7th grade, so it should be no surprise to you. But on the rubric, I will mention a few things. Of course, the levels are up here, and the different sections are here on the left. You can see each section has an approximate point value, so you can clearly see that the results in discussion are worth the most. And within each section, there's sort of these subsections or qualities that you need to pay attention to. And you really just have to read all of these and understand that this rubric was created by using the lab report guidelines. So you just need to take the time to look through it. So I hope this was helpful in helping you figure out how to do lab reports. Thank you.